this is Connie Smith with OSU Extension in Fairfield County. I am pleased to bring you some master gardeners in the garden. Even though we are not face-to-face, we can't be face-to-face because of the coronavirus. I have Terese Houle with me, and we're going to talk asparagus. Let me ask you, Terese, is that one of your favorite crops in the garden?
Well, I love the asparagus for a lot of reasons. Not only does it taste delicious, especially when picked fresh from the garden, but it's probably one of my more low-maintenance plants once it's been established. And I've been growing it in my garden. It's been about 8 years now since I first planted my first original crowns. And yes, love it. I love that it's the first vegetable, from the, garden in the spring.
Yeah.
So it probably ranks up there as number one.
So tell me this. You said it's been about 8 years since you planted that first crown. How long do those crowns typically last? I mean, is that some of your original planting that you'll be harvesting this year?
Yes, that's a really good question. So asparagus is tended to with proper care such as
fertilization,
and, mulch and weed control, all of that. They can last anywhere from 20 to 30 years. So it does take a couple years for that asparagus from when you first plant the crowns. It'll take a couple years until you can get a really decent harvest.
Okay.
However, probably after year one or two, probably after year two, you could get a small harvest. I always recommend, waiting a couple years until you really start harvesting so that you can have decent crop when it's time.
Okay. So you mentioned in that you obviously cannot harvest in the establishment year, and maybe the year after you should kind of just let it do its thing till those crowns get established. Once in year 3, when you see that asparagus starts to pop up, and I'm sure you're starting to see a little bit of it now, how long is it until you start the harvest process?
Once the spears start popping out of the ground, I put it this way, I think I've noticed the average growth rate of 4 to 6 inches in a day. So wow. I had my first couple spears pop out of the ground a couple days ago, and yesterday they probably grew about 2 inches. Today another 2 inches, and it's based on the weather today, they'll probably grow some more, and I'll be ready to harvest those first spears tomorrow.
Wow.
As long as they're, a certain size.
Yeah.
I don't like to harvest the super thin ones. I like to let those, go to fern. But the nice thick stalks or spears are the ones that I'll pick. So right now I have about 10 out of the ground. I just went down and looked before I got on the phone with you.
Oh, cool. Okay. So once that you start that harvest process, I'm sure depending on the size of your asparagus bed, how long does harvest last for you in your particular patch, Terese?
So now that we've been established for about 8 years, my harvest will go anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
Depending on the weather and and weather meaning not just temperature per se. If it gets too hot, I see less production. If it's not warm enough, I don't see a lot of production.
Okay.
And then it also depends on the amount of water that they get.
Sure.
So a nice rainy spring will bring us, a lot more than a dry one. So
do you, what would you say the size of your patches? Is it like a 3x3, a 2x2? What would you say if you were a beginner wanting to start out? How much space would you allow?
Well, when I planted mine, the recommendation was about every 18 inches you can plant a crown.
Okay.
And I believe, I mean, it's been a while, but when I planted mine, I went about 15 inches deep.
Okay.
Made sure everything, all the weeds were out. You want good soil in there, obviously. It likes, pH about 6.5.
Okay.
So that, you want to definitely do a soil test to make sure it's the right pH level. And once you get those established, so every 18, I believe the recommendation for, like number of crowns per person is pretty, like eight crowns a person.
Okay.
To feed a person for the season.
Okay.
I planted 12 total.
Okay.
My husband's not a big asparagus fan, so
okay.
it's just mostly me.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And that's a good point to bring up. You have to love what you grow. I mean, if you're doing it just because you see asparagus in the grocery store and maybe you buy a batch every now and again and you don't get it all eaten, you probably don't want to go to the work of planting asparagus for yourself. You know what I mean? I think that's a really good point that you bring up.
If you're not going to eat it, don't grow it.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. So tell me this, because I know from our work at the Extension office, we get lots of calls after harvest controlling those weeds in the asparagus patch. What's your secret?
Well, other than making sure you start with good soil and you add a nice compost mixture every year, top dress it at the beginning of the season, that in itself, I think, really does help keep the weeds down. And I also top dress at the beginning of the season with about 4 inches or so of a leaf compost.
Okay.
And that keeps the weeds down. I have a bigger issue with weeds at the beginning of the season if I don't do that versus towards the end. Because once you've done your harvest, then you just let it, go to a fern.
Okay,
and that kind of protects the soil. It buffers that from too many weeds.
Okay.
So I don't have a lot of problem later in the season.
Okay.
But if you put on a nice thick layer of mulch, like a leaf compost or something like that, it will definitely help with keeping those weeds down.
Here's the thing. I think a lot of folks who start to grow it don't think about that before. They just think, I'm planting the crowns.
Right.
I'm going to watch it grow. And then that's when the grass problems start. That's when those weeds start. And I just got to tell you, if I had $1 for every time I answered a question about people wanting to put salt in the asparagus patch to control the weeds, I would be a rich girl. I can just tell you that. And they need to not do that. That is not healthy for your soil. It's not healthy for your plants. So please don't use those wives' tale recommendations. That's not what we want you to do. That's not what Extension promotes. And so I got to ask you this, Terese, because I've seen some of the stuff that you do. Do you have a favorite way that you prepare your asparagus?
I have a couple favorite ways. One of the easiest is grilling it.
Okay.
I love grilled asparagus, either, on one of those grill pans or just put it directly on the grill with, a little olive oil, salt, and pepper.
Okay.
Delicious, and you don't have to cook it very long on the grill. Same thing, you can roast it in the oven. The other thing I like to do is appetizer. It's prosciutto wrapped asparagus. So you take a piece of prosciutto, put some cream cheese on it, or wrap it around the asparagus, and then grill it. It's delicious. So
you're making me hungry.
Those are 3 of my top favorites.
Yeah. Awesome.
It needs to grow faster.
Yeah, it needs to grow faster for you, doesn't it? Well, I appreciate you spending your time with me today and talking about asparagus, one of those great early season crops that we love to have in the garden and we love to be able to use. So thank you, Master Gardener. Terese Houle is with us, and we appreciate her sharing her time. This has been Connie Smith with OSU Extension for 88.9 WLRY, the Farm Page.